What is interesting about our industry is that when something like the PC comes along or the internet, and I lived through all of these things, they are such broad phenomena that they really do create a whole new lake, a whole new ocean, whatever metaphor you want. Now, people said, well, wasn't that crypto? No. Crypto is not such a platform. Crypto is not transformative to daily life for everyone. People are not running around all day using crypto tokens rather than currency. Crypto is a specialized market. By the way, it's important and it's interesting. It's not a horizontal transformative market. The arrival of alien intelligence in the form of savants that you use is such a transformative thing because it touches everything. It touches you as a producer, as a star, as a narrative. It touches me as an executive. It will ultimately help people make money in the stock market. People are working on that. There's so many ways in which this technology is transformative. To start, in your case, when you think about your company, whether it's little, itty bitty or a really big one, it's fundamentally how will you apply AI to accelerate what you're doing, right? In your case, for example, here you have, I think, the most successful show in the UK by far, right? So how will you use AI to make it more successful? Well, you can ask it to distribute you more, right? To make narratives, to summarize, to come up with new insights, to suggest, to have fun, to create contests. There are all sorts of ways that you can ask AI. I'll give you a simple example. If I were a politician, thankfully I'm not, and I knew my district, I would say to the computer, write a program. So I'm saying to the computer, you write a program which goes through all of the constituents in my interest, figures out roughly what they care about, and then send them a video which is labeled, of me digitally. So I'm not fake, but it's kind of like my intention, where I explain to them how important I, as their constituent, have made the bridge work. Right? And you sit there and you go, that's crazy, but it's possible. Now, politicians have not discovered this yet, but they will. Because ultimately, politicians are around a human connection, and the quickest way to have that communication is to be on their phone, talking to them about something that they care about.
When ChatGPT first launched and they sort of scaled rapidly to 100 million users, there was all these articles saying that the founders of Google had rushed back in and it was a crisis situation at Google and there was panic. And there was two things that I thought. First is that true? And second thing was, how did Google not come to market first with a ChatGPT style product?
Well, remember that Google also, that's the old question of why did you not do Facebook? Well, the answer is we were doing everything else, right? So my defensive answer is that Google has 8 or 9 or 10 billion user clusters of activity, which is pretty good, right? It's pretty hard to do, right? I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of what they're doing now. My own view is that what happened was Google was working in the engine room, and a team out of OpenAI figured out a technology called RLHF. And what happened was when they did GPT-3, and the T is transformer, which was invented at Google. When they did it, they had sort of this interesting idea, and then they sort of casually started to use humans to make it better. And RLHF refers to the fact that you use humans at the end to do A/B tests, where humans can actually say, well, this one's better, and then the system learns recursively from human training at the end. That was a real breakthrough. Right. And I joke with my OpenAI friends that you were sitting around on Thursday night and you turn this thing on and you go, holy crap, look how good this thing is. It was a real discovery, right, that none of us expected. Certainly I did not. And once they had it, the OpenAI people, Sam and Mira and so forth, we'll talk about this, they didn't really understand how good it was. They just turned it on. And all of a sudden, they had this huge success disaster because they were working on GPT-4 at the same time. It was an afterthought. And it's a great story because it just shows you that even the brilliant founders do not necessarily understand how powerful what they've done is. Now, today, of course, you have GPT-4o, basically a very powerful model from OpenAI. You have Gemini 1.5, which is clearly roughly equivalent, if not better, in certain areas. The Gemini is more multimodal, for example. And then you have other players, the Llama architecture, LLAMA, does not stand for llamas, it's large language models. out of Facebook and a number of others. There's a startup called Anthropic, which is very powerful, founded by one of the inventors of GPT-3 and a whole bunch of people. And they formed their company knowing they were going to be that successful. It's interesting. They actually formed as part of their incorporation that they were a public benefit corporation because they were concerned that it would be so powerful that some evil CEO in the future would force them to go for revenue as opposed to world goodness. So the teams, when they were doing this, they understood the power of what they were doing, and they anticipated the level of impact, and they were right.
Do you think if Steve Jobs was at Apple, they would be on that list? How do you think the company would be different?
Well, Tim has done a fantastic job in Steve's legacy. And what's interesting is normally the successor is not as good as the founder. But somehow Tim, having worked with Steve for so long and having set the culture, they've managed to continue the focus on the user with this incredible safety focus in terms of apps and so forth and so on. And they've remained a relatively closed culture. I think all of those would have maintained had Steve, tragically died. And he was a good friend. But the important point is Steve believed very strongly in what are called closed systems, where you own and control all your intellectual property. And he and I would battle over open versus closed because I came from the other side, and I did this with respect. I don't think they would have changed that.
And they've changed that now?
No. I think Apple is still basically a single company that's vertically integrated. The rest of the industry is largely more open.
I think everyone, especially in the wake of the recent launch of the iPhone 16, which I've got somewhere here, has this expectation that Apple would, if Steve was still alive, taken some big, bold bet in some. And I think about, Tim's tenure. He's done a fantastic job of keeping that company going, running it with the sort of principles of Steve Jobs. But has there been many big, bold, successful bets? A lot of people point at the AirPods, which have a great product. But I think AI is one of those things where you go, I wonder if Steve would have understood the significance of it. And
Steve was that smart that I would never, he's at Elon level intelligence. When Steve and I worked together very closely, which was 15 years ago before his death, he was very frustrated at the success of MP4 over MOV format files. And he was really mad about it. And I said, well, maybe that's because you were closed and QuickTime was not generally available. I said, that's not true. My team, our product is better and so forth. So his core belief system, he's an artist, right? And given the choice, we used to have this debate where, do you want to be Chevrolet or do you want to be Porsche?